So I'd like to thank you all for showing up here today in person, and those of you on the live stream for showing up to support each other. I think many of us have been affected either directly or indirectly by suicide, and it's something that we want to make sure we're addressing specifically so everyone knows that they're not alone. Before we get started, this is kind of a challenging topic to navigate. There are tons of resources available to all of us here within Google and beyond. Before we get started today, we think it's very important to understand a little bit of the statistics around suicide and why this is such a critical topic for us to be discussing. It is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. We will lose 40,000 Americans who will die by suicide this year, and there will be approximately 500,000 attempts this year. Today alone, we will lose 117 Americans to suicide. These are very shocking statistics, and it's alarming, and it's why we're bringing people together today to discuss the importance of this topic and discuss the importance of finding a space for those talks. I'd like to welcome Jessica DiVento, Dr. Jessica DiVento, who worked very hard for that title. She is going to be moderating the discussion today with the wonderful folks from the S-Word film. She is an employee mental health program manager and business advisor at Google. Prior to Google, she worked primarily in university health and corporate employee assistance, and she specializes in crisis management and critical incident response, as well as treating anxiety, trauma, and young adult professionals. She has over a decade of experience treating hundreds of suicidal clients and has been affected by this issue personally. Please welcome Jessica.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce our panelists up, and then we're going to roll the trailer for the clip. And just as a reminder, we do have Jana here for those of you if you want to talk. And as we set the tone and intention today, just for folks to be mindful that since it is a sensitive topic, please have laptops and screens down if you're able, and be mindful if you have a reaction, totally normal human reaction to this topic. Feel free to do what you need to take care of yourself, but be mindful and respectful of those around you when you do so. So first, I'd like to introduce Lisa Klein. She's the director of the film. Lisa, if you want to come up. Lisa is an award-winning documentarist, and she's done multiple films focused on mental health. And it's a passion project for her, the S-Word, as she had both her brother and father die from suicide. And Lisa also co-owns Mad Pics, which is based locally in LA, and she runs it with her husband, right?
Yep.
Thank you. And now I'd also like to invite Ann Taylor to the stage. Thank you. Anne is featured in the documentary, and she's a suicide survivor. And so she'll be talking about her experience today. She's a single mother of 2 adult children now, right? 2 adult men. And she has attempted suicide 4 times between the years of 2009 and 2012. And I'm so grateful she can be here with us today. And thankfully, she's supported by a therapist and a psychiatrist. She also currently works as a crisis counselor and as a peer facilitator from the D.D. Hirsch Mental Health Services Center locally. So if we go ahead and roll the trailer, please.
I remember thinking, God, just hold on, because somehow, some way, this is going to make sense.
The reaction of people around me was just, shut up.
Anybody who has lost anyone through suicide, you always say, what did I miss? Why couldn't I save him?
Suicide. That's a scary word, isn't it?
I just always felt like an alien, like a burden.
I started to look for other people like me, and I couldn't find anything. Like, where were these people?
To say I'm an attempt survivor, even say the word suicide, is a record stopper.
I just want people to look into these people's eyes.
Because we've always looked away. You know, hashtag suicide so white.
My name is Leah Harris, and I am a survivor.
When I'm grumpy, I'm an activist. When I'm nice, I'm an advocate.
It's a project about suicide, but I'm focusing on life.
It's not the word suicide that is the problem. It is the deafening silence around it.
We lose 112 people every day. That's bigger than a small jet airplane.
I'm not doing well. I find myself wanting to hurt myself. No, I just don't really know how to handle it.
The revolution in mental health is happening, and we are at the forefront.
Is suicide still an option for you?
I don't want it to be.
We're changing a culture.
More and more, it becomes clear to me that I am never alone, that we are never, ever alone.
What would you say to suicide if it was a thing, if it was a person? I'd say suck it!
This S word, it's only scary if you give it this sort of boogeyman weight.
I used to think, man, maybe life just isn't for everybody. I was done. And I was wrong.
It's here. It's not coming soon. It's already available.
It's already there, yeah.
So please watch the film if you haven't done so already. I just appreciate that trailer so much. I'm so glad that we're here having this conversation. And I'm so grateful for both of you being here. I just want to say that. Lisa, why did you make the film?
That's a great question. And there were several reasons. But so when I was in college, both my father and my brother died by suicide, as you said. And it wasn't an immediate, okay, I need to do something. But, you know, over the years, just writing about it, trying to process it, seeing a therapist, you know, going through all of this stuff. And prior to this film, we did a film about bipolar. And there was somebody in the film who had lost their daughter to suicide. And I thought, okay, I'm done. I've dealt with it. I'm good. And then I realized in 2 seconds I just wasn't. And so as altruistic as this may seem, like, oh, wow, you really did this great, like, part of it was for me, you know, it was my process. And I started researching it, and I started as, you know, coming from a place of loss. So I was, you know, Googling this, you know, I was on the internet, and I was looking for people and all of that. And what I found was sort of this just amazing kind of, I found Desiree first. You know, I found Live Through This, and then I went to the American Association of Suicidology conference, and I started this whole process, and I realized there's just this like vibrant group of people who had attempted suicide and survived. These people with lived experience, and I was like, well, these are the people I need to talk to. I mean, these are the people who can tell me, you know, who can tell the world about their experiences and all of that. And I just thought it was really important to. The silence is just not helping anything. If anything, the silence is killing, you know, as many people as suicide, you know. I mean, because, you know, by not talking about it, you're taking something so difficult to deal with, and then you're trapping it even more by not talking about it. And it just didn't seem, you know, it seemed wrong to me, and I wanted to get the conversation going, so.
Well, I'm so glad you did, because I know this has really prompted not just this conversation, but so many more. And the work that you do with schools and things like that around the country is so powerful. And why did you agree to be in the film?
I was approached to be in this film if I was interested in sharing my experience. I was very, very hesitant. I was very scared. What I was feeling myself was a lot of shame, feeling isolated, feeling alone, feeling like I'd done something terribly wrong. And it was that shame for myself that I wanted to express to people what I was going through and what I was feeling, and how I know there's other people that are going through this too. So, so I agreed to do this. I was very hesitant, but I did agree to do this, and it was for me to help me to spread the word of what I was going through, but also to allow other people to possibly be able to talk about their own situation. And it's very, very isolating, and there's a lot of shame that goes with it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I hear you, and I'm just so glad that you did choose to speak out and break that stigma of shame that's around it.
Yeah.
And it sounds like Lisa gave you that space to be the container, but also to have a voice now for the world, right?
Exactly, and that kind of started everything. And then I realized, gosh, you know, I've been given a little bit of a platform here. I'm not much of a public speaker and really don't like to share these things so much, but I was given that chance to say something to the world, and so I'm trying to do that as best I can. So I thank you for having us here today and allowing that discussion. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. It's very, very powerful that you all are here with us today. Can we go ahead and roll the clip of Anne?
There are parts of me of which I'm glad I'm alive, but there's many parts of me that I really wish I wasn't. I don't know if I'm really safe. I don't know if I'm out of the woods yet.
When was your last attempt?
2.5 years ago. I have 2 really amazing kids. That's the reason I'm still alive.
I mean, when you first told me, I was incredibly shocked to begin with. Like, thinking of taking your own life. That's scary and sad, and it shouldn't happen. I'm sorry. I mean, like, hearing that, it definitely made my heart drop, and like, I just can't even imagine it without you in my life. Don't even want to think about it, but I know I need to.
I never, ever would want to leave you or hurt you.
I don't know. I'm really glad you did tell me this. I think you're stronger than I did before because you're going out and reaching out and telling me. Like, I want to be there for you if you need help.
I want to wake up and see the day and go, oh, it's a new day. This is awesome. This is what I want.
I just want to say I'm so touched by the bond you and your son have and that special moment.
Yeah, we are very close when we talk about these things, and yeah, that was an incredible moment that the 2 of us were able to share together.
That Lisa captured.
Yeah. So yeah,
the 3 of us.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's amazing.
And it makes me teary every time I watch it.
And just the thoughtfulness and insightfulness that he had at such a young age.
He was 18 at the time, yeah.
How is it to watch yourself on film now?
Well, then at the time I was obviously very nervous and very scared, and I think when you look at yourself on film, you don't really see what you think you look like and what you sound like, so it felt very strange and very awkward. I've watched it enough times now that I'm comfortable with it, and as difficult as that conversation was, I'm so glad that we had that, and I'm so glad that other people have been able to see that. So I look at myself on the film and I feel very proud. I feel like I've taken some great steps forward into hopefully decreasing that stigma of suicide. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm curious, Lisa, how is it for you to be in the room as people are sharing these stories? Either watching, I know Desiree interviewing folks and some, and then it looked like your conversation with them and others.
Are you talking about like, as like in the room as we're interviewing and we're talking and all of that? Yeah, it was really important, and just like the first time that we talked to Anne, for example, was we had her psychiatrist sitting behind me because it was one of those things that like whatever is going to make you comfortable, and if he's here, you know, I mean, we really tried to, you know, make it a comfortable situation. And what was really important, and what I realized, like I may have had my my questions, like you have your questions there, but it becomes a dialogue. You know, it's like, okay, so if I just sit there and say, you know, Anne, I want you to tell me, like, you can ask me whatever too. I mean, I've been in a different space in suicide, but please, let's just talk about this. Let's just talk about it. So it was pretty emotional a lot of the times. I mean, the clip that you saw, like when she was sitting with Sam, I mean, that was really beautiful. I'm sure that I was tearing up behind the camera. We were, you know, both of us were, the camera person and me, and talking to, as I told you before, like Brandon's mother. You know, I mean, there were some moments that were real, like, wow, this is really happening. I mean, these people are talking about probably the scariest, most difficult moments of their lives, and they're entrusting this, and we better not screw this up. You know, I mean, there was pressure too. It's like, how do we handle this? And when we were cutting it too, it's like, we've got these people, literally, their lives, not to sound so dramatic, but their lives in our hands a little bit, you know, and we really wanted them, like, for Anne to say, I feel proud of myself watching it, means the world, because that's what we wanted to do, you know, and when the truth comes out. So.
What's coming up for me right now and what resonates with me is like our ability to tolerate the discomfort of sharing our story or of holding these space for folks so that we can have the conversation. Because the conversation is just so taboo and so stigmatized in our society. And for those of us that can take that on and hold space for that really allows us to move forward. Because we're not going to get the traction we need otherwise.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's very cool. Something that stuck out to me in the film was the language that was used around suicide. And myself as a mental health professional, I reflected a lot about that kind of during and after the film. And I've heard it a bit in the psych community, but seeing it on film was just really powerful to get that message out, specifically around the phrase committed suicide versus died by suicide. If you want to, either of you want to speak more to that.
I can start, and then you, however you want to do it. But yeah, I mean, I learned as we were doing this, and then, I mean, I can't remember ever saying committed suicide when I think about when I talked about my brother and my father. But I must have, I guess. But I don't, like, now it's completely out of my vernacular, I guess. But in talking to Desiree, like when we were talking that day, and even prior to that, like Leah very much educated me about a lot of stuff, Leah, who's in the film as well. But when we were talking about it, I mean, Desiree's whole point, and a lot of people in the suicide prevention mental health community talk about commit being such a weighted word. You know, we commit murder, we commit rape. But as Fel, Dez's wife, now wife, says, you know, we also, you know, commit to marriage, commit, you know, so it's a thing, you know, like there are some people on the side that say, you know, once you start getting rid of, you know, pretty soon we're not going to be able to talk at all because all the words are going to be gone. So when somebody, you know, so it's definitely a thing, and I do prefer to say died by suicide. I mean, it's clear. You know, commit really does, again, it's very strong, and it's very, like, I decided that I am going to commit this action, and, you know, so you might have a more...
Well, I think also that a long time ago, I don't even know how many years ago, suicide was considered a crime and was considered a sin. And that has kind of carried through where people have just said committed suicide. It's just gone on for so long that it's carried through into now. And that's just a term that's been used. And really, it's when I hear committed suicide, it makes me feel like I'm a felon or I've done something terribly wrong and I should be abolished or banned or whatever it is. But so I cringe when I hear that word, and I would prefer to say that, you know, they died by suicide. You know, it's more what it is. You know, committed is a very harsh, strong word. I can see both sides of it, but to me, I think it's just something that's carried through the years.
It sounds
and
like
we haven't gotten rid of. Yeah.
Sounds like it also enhances and increases the shame around it.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
I just want to acknowledge, too, in some countries it is still criminalized. And very difficult to address it in some ways because of that. Yeah.
And it's not a crime.
Yeah. And Desiree has been mentioned a couple of times in our conversation. I know she was in the clips. She's the one, for those of you who haven't seen the film yet, taking the pictures. And she had her project Live Through This, right?
Live Through This, yes.
I'm curious to know your experience working with Desiree, because she's highlighted a lot in the film. Both, I know, Lisa, you said she's the first one you found and kind of reached out to for her project. And then Anne, she took photos of you, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm curious about your experiences working with her.
Absolutely. You want to start on that?
Sure. So my experience with Des is doing the interview, which you saw. She asked me a series of different questions, and we talked about suicide, what it means to me, and my different experiences with hospitals or whatever situation I was put in. For me, Des was a peer. She was somebody who has been there, who understands what it feels like to reach that awful point and to actually cross the line and try to take your own life. There's like this line there. And I think people who have attempted and gone that far have some sort of internal connection with each other. And immediately I felt connected to Des and was willing to tell her anything. And I kind of feel like we're walking through this journey together. You know, she's my traveling partner in a sense, as with other people who have attempted to. There's definitely a tight bond. So Des is an amazing person. Amazing person. So I'm lucky to have gotten to know her. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw her project, the fact that, I mean, because who are you going to talk to again about the most difficult time of your life? I mean, somebody who's been there, and she has been there. And what really struck me in talking to her was her idea of the way she does her portraits, which we'll see at some point. Is she has this whole thing about look into my eyes, look into the lens, because oftentimes with something like suicide, something like, somebody who's attempted suicide, we tend to look away. And she didn't want them to look away. Her whole point is, let's look at these people. Let's listen to them. I mean, she interviewed and talked to them and all of that. And then we realized somewhere, I think I was a little slow on the uptake, because I realized as we were going, it was probably a year in, that, oh, you know what? This is probably going to be the centerpiece, because she's taking pictures and we're photographing, and like we're doing this together. And it really did become kind of a partnership, like even sharing, like we introduced her to Anne and she introduced us to Craig or who, I mean, so it really did become a partnership of who we were talking to and how we were doing it, and we just sort of converged on that.
And I just want to acknowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, Anne, but she took this photo here, right?
Yeah, she did take that photo. Yeah, it's a very serious picture. But if you look in my eyes, you can see that there's something in there. There's some pain and there's some hope that I could be supported or helped, or I don't know. But it's like you can make everything up and do your hair all fancy and put makeup on and everything, but when you look in people's eyes, you see a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, she captured like the essence of it, and really humanizing it,
Right.
and having you hear, to give that extra voice to it.
And I look at that picture, and that's what I felt like at the time. So yeah, whatever that means. Yeah.
That's amazing. I'm curious, as we're talking about suicide, and we're talking about the shame about suicide, I know there's a lot of myths behind suicide that are propagated just kind of through everyday talking, people who do choose to talk about it. Are there any myths that you want to debunk here today, or anything you wish people knew about suicide that you think a lot of people don't know?
Well, the coward myth. I think, that it's such a cowardly thing to do, because, I mean, I was 18. I was just about 18 when my father died, and I didn't know right away. I mean, it was hidden from. There was a whole family of shame thing, and then when I found out, and the idea of, God, what a cowardly act. He left his family, he left his kids, he left his thing. And that was the narrative that I sort of learned, and I never wanted to embrace it, because I really did hold my father on a pedestal. And so what I've sort of learned, or what I've chosen to learn, because I can create my own narrative, because he's not here to tell me anything at this point. And so I try to, I think that I look at it as more, I mean, I don't want to say, well, suicide, that's the most courageous thing you can do, but in a way for him, he waited until I was the youngest of 3 kids, and he waited until I was in college. So I tried to flip it, to him thinking it through and realizing that, I would be okay, which, again, is kind of ridiculous, but still, in his own mind of how he did this, and then wondering, wow, he must have been struggling for a long time, because when people think, wow, well, that's an impulsive act, or this person is killing themselves because they broke up with their boyfriend, or whatever it is, it's like realizing that it's kind of like that suicide itself is kind of like Jenga or whatever, I mean, I'm not always great at metaphors, but when there are a lot of pieces. There are a lot of pieces to this puzzle. So it isn't just, you failed a test, so you went out and killed you. I mean, because people do want to simplify it, because it's easier to say that this person, this happened, so this, so I mean that's another myth, but.
Yeah, and sometimes it is spontaneous with people, a suicide attempt, and other times it's something that has been building up for a long period of time. I would say for me, I was overwhelmed. I had a series of losses that happened very suddenly together, and I became very overwhelmed, and my head was foggy and spinning, and I couldn't think, I couldn't act the way I should act. It just came up on me, and I attempted suicide. So I don't look at it, I look at it as more of something that was just so terribly overwhelming, and that I felt like if I continued on with this life, that I would be a burden to everybody else, and that I would be harming my kids if I stayed alive. So it's some of those distorted thoughts that happen in that moment. I think another thing, another misconception is that you shouldn't talk about it, you shouldn't ask people how they're feeling. If you're worried about someone who you think might be suicidal, the most important thing you can do is to actually talk to them and ask them questions and listen to what they have to say, and ask them specifically, are you having suicidal thoughts? That opens a dialogue for that person to say, okay, maybe I can share this, maybe I can get help. But if you just walk away and pretend it's not there, it's going to isolate us even more and put us more at risk. So talking about it is very, very, very important.
Yeah, because there's a myth, there's a myth that if you bring it up, then somebody's going to think about it. And if you really think about it, if you're going along, life is fine, you're doing your thing, and somebody says, are you thinking about suicide? And, you can be like, no, I wasn't. But now that you mention it, I think it's a great idea. That doesn't usually happen that way.
No, that doesn't happen.
So
there's no inception that happens.
No. Oh, let me plant that thought.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you bring that up, because just being able to broach the conversation opens the door for people to get help if they want it at that time. Yeah. And if we don't have the conversation, then the door may not be open.
Oh, I did think of one other thing. The other thing that I learned from you, from people who had been there, the idea that, because we all, I think our nature is we want to help, we want to fix it, we want to fix whatever the problem is. So the our nature would tell us, somebody's telling you, because we do say, talk to somebody or whatever, and oftentimes it's like, okay, well, here's what you do. So you can go to the hospital, or you can take medication, or you can see a therapist, or you can eat quinoa, or you can run, or you can, it's like, yeah, I've got the solution for you. And oftentimes, not quite that. It's like, how about turning it the other way and listening to what they have to say and what they need? So that was a big learning thing.
Yeah, it's so hard. Both that, like the desire to want to control and help can be so difficult for the person supporting, but if they really want to support, to have that open ear.
Listen with no judgment.
Listen without judgment.
Yeah, and when people try to tell you what to do, to eat quinoa or whatever it is, it almost hurts, because it feels like they're not listening. They're just trying to just get rid of the problem, to push it under the rug. So, yeah, listening is the most important thing, I could say.
I appreciate that you will bring in that here. I also wanted to address the myth of the coward. I don't know, I had this thought of, maybe that's driven by folks who get so angry after people kill themselves. And if they do it that way, then they don't have to deal with all the other emotions. Like you said, they simplify it. They can draw it and put it in a box. But what I appreciate when you're talking about your dad, for example, is you're shifting to a place of having empathy for the pain that he was in that moment. And I imagine that can be a very powerful place for listeners and supporters to be in too.
Well, if you look at like somebody who has died of cancer, and this person just fought for their, they fought for their life, and here they are. And if you have somebody who dies by suicide, particularly somebody who's in their 60s or 50s, or they could have been struggling for 30 years, and it is in cancer, it's whatever is going on that could be unbelievable pain. So to kind of vilify them or it is kind of minimizes what somebody's feeling, and I think that really takes away from what's going on.
And again, I do think in that specific moment when you decide to act, I don't think anybody, I don't know, but I don't think anybody could be thinking logically and clearly at that point. I think you've reached a limit where you're just acting on whatever is telling you to act, and you're not thinking clearly. So I want to point that out, that I honestly don't think it's a selfish thing. I can see why people get frustrated and angry with that, but there's more to it than just trying to end your life because you lost your job. There's more to it than that.
There's a lot of layers. It's
There's
usually
a
not
lot of
what's
layers.
just at the surface.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the selfishness thing is ridiculous because there is that whole sort of burden thing. Like sometimes it's weirdly selfless in that well, I'm gonna relieve this person of their burden, and I can say the one thing that I would say to that is the so-called burden. I think most people who've lost anybody to suicide would say, I would take that burden any day of the week over losing the person. So it's, yeah.
Yeah. And that's another thing too, is I think on my end of it, I don't realize the impact that I would have if I took my own life. I'm not aware of how intense that pain would be for other people and the ripple effect. I'm starting to learn that, but I really don't get it. So there's both two different, completely different sides that we're just, that we need to come together on.
Yeah. It's amazing you can hold space for both of those truths and perspectives at once and trying to integrate the two. And we talk about the listener kind of being that opportunity to just open the door to hopefully get people help. But I also just want to acknowledge that it can be very hard once people start that process, and that there's a lot of barriers of access to care, not only in the U.S., but globally. And to give credence to that, I'm hoping we can roll the clip of Kelechi, and then we can talk about that a bit.
Anytime you attempt, you first have to go to the medical hospital where they make sure everything's okay. And I have this nurse tell me, don't let yourself get raped again. I'm in a psych ward and I'm like, oh, I want to react to this, and you have power over me, and you think the helpful thing is to tell me not to get raped again? Meanwhile, we're watching, they're actually showing Silence of the Lambs in the mental hospital, and I'm telling the nurses, I'm like, do you guys think this is a appropriate movie choice?
You can't make that shit up.
You can't make that shit up. Oh, man. What I learned from being in the hospital was how never to be in a hospital again. There's still ups and downs. I mean, I find ways through music, through my karaoke, through my poetry to live better. It was a big smashing this mask of, I'm gonna make you laugh and make you look that way. Oh my God. Secrets made me sick. That's what I really think about it.
I want more of your hand in that, but look at that shit.
That's my face. Hey, it's okay. It's not bad.
I'm just struck by the picture of her again at the end, Kelechi. You can really just see in her eyes, right? I'm just, in speaking of the system, me as a mental health professional and having also personal experiences with folks in my family who have had issues with suicidal thoughts and such, it's so hard, the system. And I just want to acknowledge, as part of the system itself, it is broken. And I'm just curious to hear from you all what barriers you noticed, both interviewing folks and going through it yourself.
I just want to say one thing I learned recently. I was just at this conference in Santa Fe, and this woman stood up. She was a social worker, and she said, we always say the system's broken. I mean, the system's a mess, but when you say the word broken, because we all say that because it is pretty easy to say, and it, you know, it's kind of clear, but like what other word, speaking of words and terminology, what other word could we use that shows like, okay, we're on it. We're working, we're making it better. We're doing something to make it better rather than, oh, well, it's broken, because it does seem like a throwaway thing. But having said that, yeah, no, you should talk about your experience. But yeah, like talking to Kelechi and and Leah, oh my God, I mean, in fact, we were just talking today about something else, and she's like, I think psychiatrists, I think they'll be gone in 50 years because, you know, that's not real science. And, you know, and she's had such bad experiences. When she was 15, she was told, you will be, she was at a psychiatric hospital, and she said, you will be here for the rest of your life. You will never get better. So, you know, this was her experience. Obviously, that doesn't happen with everybody, and there are some really good psychiatrists, and there are others who say things like that. So it's but your experience.
Yeah, as far as psychiatrists go, I do have one that I think is fabulous. There's only a limit to so much that he can do, you know. There's medications, there's TMS, there's all these different things you can try, but sometimes they don't always work. But I think my experience with the medical system, when you're 5150 and you're taken away for a suicide attempt or at risk of attempting, they will take you by ambulance, hopefully, if you're lucky. Sometimes the ambulance doesn't come, so the police will handcuff you and take you, which is very demeaning. That did not happen to me, but they'll take you to an emergency room, generally first, and you'll be evaluated, and then you'll end up in a bed. And my experience with that was very uncomfortable. Generally, the nurses at the time, and I'm hoping things have changed a lot better, but my experience is that they disapproved of what I had done, and so did not want to give me the care that they would give other patients. At the same time, there is a security guard sitting in a chair looking at you the whole entire time because you're at risk to society. So it makes you feel like you're a criminal. After you go to the emergency room, then you go to a psychiatric hospital, and it's lockdown. You know, you're stripped of shoelaces and ties and, you know, hair dryers and jewelry, and you're stripped of everything, and then you just have to accept that, and you can't leave. You're locked. You're treated as a criminal, and I don't know what the solution is. I don't know how to prevent that from happening, but it's a horrible experience. Now, once I realized that it was locked down, and there were times when I knew I needed to protect myself because I was not safe, I would voluntarily check myself into a psychiatric hospital, and I have probably done that 10 times beyond my suicide attempts because it's the only safe place I can be. So that's what is given to us, and unfortunately, it's not a very good situation.
Yeah, it's so hard, and as a clinician, I always really struggled with making that decision because I know it was going to be a hard process, but I knew that's where somebody would be safe. And yeah.
But it's interesting because now I still struggle with suicidal thoughts. Sometimes I am at risk, but I think jumping to the conclusion, the therapists and psychiatrists that I work with, the last thing they want to do is to put me in the hospital because that can be more detrimental at times. So it's really knowing what that limit is. I can say I have suicidal thoughts. I can say I have a means of how to do it right next to me, and I, you know, they're not going to send me to the hospital unless I've already taken something or done something to hurt myself. But they know that limit, how far to take it, because it is a bad experience to be in a hospital, in a psychiatric hospital, and the stigma.
I'm glad you have that relationship with your providers so you can work together to know what that line is.
I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky I even have a psychiatrist and therapist. So.
And Lisa, I really appreciate you challenging the language around that. And I was reflecting on that after you said that. And it's like, maybe the system is developing.
Maybe,
I don't know. Maybe. It's going through growing pains, something, so that it still is kind of this necessary part of the process, but maybe we can tolerate the tension or those hiccups where it doesn't work so well knowing it's hopefully going to inevitably, and I don't know, maybe this talk is going to inspire somebody to go out and to continue to improve what's there.
Mhm.
We've come so far in 50 years. I can only imagine what the next 50 is going to bring us.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, it's
something to think about.
because, you know, the one thing that I've heard, and you would know about this, the idea of when people talk about people with a diagnosable mental illness dying younger, and you think, oh, well, suicide or, you know, whatever. But apparently there is a whole thing, and you may know about this, if you go in for heart palpitations or whatever it may be, and somebody looks at your chart and sees, oh, bipolar disorder, you're okay, you know, go home. So, I mean, I've heard that, like somebody in our previous film, she went in for a migraine, and they saw that she had a history and that she had bipolar disorder, and they sent her home. I mean, you know, when you hear about things like that, that's sort of the flip side of this that is pretty upsetting.
That's, yeah, very upsetting. And I have heard stories like that, and it is not best practices, but I acknowledge that I've heard stories like that too. Yeah. And if you're struggling, please know that there's hope and that you can get help, and please reach out for help. We have some resources here. And to end, we're going to go ahead and run the clip of Brandon, please.
Suicide Prevention Center crisis line.
So Sarah, if you'd like, I can give you the mental health.
You lost your job and your girlfriend. That's pretty rough.
So it sounds like you're trying to reach out and get some support before it gets worse, huh?
Do you have a plan of how you would do it?
What we have to do is help people feel safe and comfortable to talk about something that scares the hell out of them. And if somebody can connect with you in that moment where you're feeling like there's no reason to live, that takes them out of the aloneness. And the moment that they're not feeling alone, they're already safer than they were before they spoke with you.
Le quiero hacer unas preguntas primeramente en caso si le tengo que dar algún recurso. ¿Cuál es su código postal?
She's fine. Ended up well. I just had to make sure that you had the support that you needed for that too. No, not everybody can do this. A lot of people care, but it's sometimes really difficult to put that care and that passion and compassion into the right kind of skill set to talk to people who are thinking about suicide. Brandon was one of our own. He was a very, very good counselor. I think he saved many lives.
How long has it been since you've had any kind of psychiatric help?
This was his way of staying alive, I think, for a number of years.
Are you calling us because you're having bad symptoms or something?
Brandon was the only shift supervisor I've ever had who had groupies.
Don't wanna see the light, 'cause I don't feel any light
He was a rock star.
anymore.
And that's when he grew his hair really long, so he looked like a rock star.
Don't wanna wake up anymore. Don't wanna see.
Asking him, are you suicidal? I couldn't ask him that early on. I couldn't even face that. There was really that side of me, that this is all gonna end. He's gonna be okay. Anybody who has lost anyone through suicide, you always say, what did I miss? Why couldn't I save him?
What did I do wrong? And what haven't I done? I really don't have any answers to that, you know?
The last thing we want, I think this is true with everybody, is to forget our loved one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much.